Today is April 23rd, 2026. We are at the Amelia Island Museum of History. The following interview is being conducted as part of the Amelia Island Museum of History's Heritage Keepers Project. We are interviewing Thomas Hamilton Askins, Jr. My name is Susan Hardy Steger, and I will interview the subject on behalf of the Amelia Island Museum of History. Also attending this interview session are the following individuals: Casey Askins Sapp, who is Tom's sister, Sherry Lynn Sapp, a niece, and Gabriel Nye Hartwell, a grandson. So, Tom, tell us about yourself.
Well, as you said, my name is Thomas Hamilton Askins, Jr. I was born in the St. Vincent's Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida, August 10th, 1939. It's 20 days before World War II started in Europe. So I lived my entire life when I was until 6 years old. And I lived my entire life during World War II, which is, I think, changed everybody's thing. I graduated from Florida State, from the Virginia Beach High School, from Fernandina Beach High School in the class of 1957, and then I graduated from Florida State University in 1961. I joined the Navy and served in the United States Navy from 1961 to 1966, and I trained as a naval aviator. And I married Lynn Creech in 1966, and we'll be married 60 years, December the 24th, 2026, this year. In 1966, after the Navy's service, I went to work with Trans World Airlines, and I flew airplanes for them for 32 years. And then I retired in 1997. My parents are Thomas Hamilton Askins Sr., and my mother is Catherine Hardy Askins, and my sister is passed away, Deanna Askins Wagner, and Casey Askins Sapp, who is here. The Askins family and the Hardy family have lived in Fernandina, or moved to Fernandina, more than 100 years ago. The Hardys, my mother's side, and then my father's side moved here almost exactly 100 years ago. From there, what should I do?
Tell us about the name of your grandfathers.
Okay, my grandfather on my mother's side was Noble Anthony Hardy, and he was born about 1880, give or take a year or two, and he passed away in 1955. And he moved here in about 1900. He went to school at a college down in Gainesville, Florida, which I think became University of Florida later. He graduated from that school, and then him and his brother, J.R. Hardy, opened up a store in downtown Fernandina in the building right next to the train station. And that building, they stayed there for about 15 years, and then they moved to the 3rd Street, Center Street. Is it 3rd Street or 4th Street? And they opened up the Hardy Brothers. I think it was called Standard Hardware to begin with, and then they became Hardy Brothers later. And then at some point, Ira Hardy got into the thing, and then they closed up that store and sold it to Ira Hardy, and he ran it. And then my grandfather, Noble, and his brother moved down on 2nd Street and opened up another store for Marine Hardware. They sold Firestone tires and oil and gasoline.
And the name of that company was?
Atlantic Oil Company, and they had another corporation called the Citizen Oil Company.
And those oil companies, were they more geared to shrimping?
I don't think so. I think it was automobile. I didn't see the shrimping part of it there.
Okay.
My uncles did that later. Will and Dudley and N.A. became shrimpers later.
Okay. Tell us where Noble lived.
Noble Hardy was born in St. Mary's, Georgia, and then his father was Charles Hardy, and he was a Confederate, was in the Confederate Army, and he was a doctor and served in the Western Theater. My grandfather, as I said, was born about 1880, and then they in St. Mary's, and then at some point when they were very young, they moved to Chester, Florida, and then after he went to school down in Gainesville, he came here, so he moved here about 1900.
When did he purchase the house on 5th Street?
5th and Alachua.
Yes, 5th
Yes.
and Alachua in the northwest corner.
Yes.
Tell us about the history of that house and when your grandfather...
415 Alachua Street. The house was built about 1905, and it was built by a pharmacist, I think, and then he lived there a year or two and sold it to another family who had a child, and that child later became the governor of Florida. And I forgot his name right now. I have to think about that. But actually, he became the governor of Florida later. I have an Amelia Island book that has a whole story about that. The house was, and then in 1909, my grandfather and my grandmother, Emma D. Hardy, got married. And they were married in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where her family was. And then at that time, they bought the house on Alachua Street, and that was about 1909. They lived in the house until he passed away. About 1952, he became ill, so my family moved in with him because the other brothers moved to Brownsville, Texas with their shrimp fleet because all the shrimp had been shrimped out and died from the pulp mill and all that stuff. So
All right, good information. Now, tell me about your grandfather Hardy and his real estate.
Granddaddy Hardy owned apparently a lot of real estate around and about. And I was telling them, him and some other people owned Peters Point. Now, this is Hardy, you're talking about Granddaddy Hardy.
Noble Hardy.
Noble Hardy. He was, I think he had some real estate, but not a huge amount. Apparently he had some down in Tampa, and he had some here. And because I remember one day down on 8th Street, way back in the woods, he had a house, and it was rented to some people. And he took me down there one day, and when I was about 7 or 8 years old, in his Model A Ford to collect rent. I remember that incident. So.
Excuse me. I believe I saw his name, Noble Hardy's name, on a deed at Amelia Park or on some mortgage application or something at Amelia Park. All right, he owned a lot of land. Did Will Hardy then take over some of the land on Noble's death?
No, I don't think so. Not really. He didn't have when Noble Hardy, my grandfather, died, he didn't have any. He had his house, and that was about it.
All right, tell us about Will Hardy, your relationship with him, and why he owned property near what is now Emma Love Hardy Elementary School.
Will Hardy was the oldest child. He was born in 1910, and he was too young for World War I, and too old for World War II to be grafted. So he had a job at the pulp mill, and at some point he started with the shrimp business, probably about in the 30s. And he started buying boats, and they would expand, and he was very good at business. He out at 5 Points, all that whole area on both sides of the road going to the beach, Sadler Road, he bought multiple acres of land for almost nothing apparently back then, and he kept it. And he had it back when the school was open. They wanted to put the school, so he donated the land for the Emma D. Love School, and he gave him the land, saying, "The only thing I want you to do is name it after my mother." And that's what happened there. And he made a lot of money. He was very wealthy. They shrimp ran out here about 1951 or 2. They moved. Both 3 uncles moved the entire fleet to Brownsville, Texas, and operated out of there down in Camp Peachy and all that stuff with the Gulf of Mexico.
So Will Love was there, and John Hardy, or one of the Hardys, was in the Louisiana area. Is that correct?
Yes, but I'm not real familiar with them. I know them. I'm not real good about that. They were in Louisiana, yes.
Okay. So your father and his World War II.
Okay, I'll start out with my father's side of the family.
Okay.
Okay. And my family, the Askins, lived in Fayetteville, Tennessee. Somewhere around the mid-1920s, my grandfather, J.M. Askins, Joseph Manley Askins, decided to move his family to Fernandina because he sold all of his he had a lot of property in Fayetteville, Tennessee, and they sold it, a big building. They had a grocery store, and they had a place where they big saddles and all kind of leather and all that stuff. So they decided to move the family to Fernandina because they were going to build a aluminum screen factory here, and he was going to invest in it. And it had something to do with my grandmother's uncle, but I'm not sure how that worked out. But anyway, that was a scam. He got here and it was like there was no factory here, so he just moved in. And then he went in the real estate business and insurance business. Mm-hmm. And Granddaddy Askins is the one that had all the property. He bought property everywhere. My dad said that somebody would come in. He had a real estate license, and somebody would come in and they had a lot for sale. And my grandfather would take. First thing he'd do is he'd go out and look at the lot. And then he would go out and find a couple of people he had that would cut down trees, and they'd clean the whole thing off, take trees down, and then he would put 4x4s where the property line was and paint them white. And all the trees that were left, he'd paint the bottom of them white, about 6 feet up. And that was he'd like to do that because he would do lime, they would kill the bugs and all that stuff. Plus the pop factor. And people would come up and look at it, and so they knew where the lot was, and he just, he was a very good salesman. It's about 1925, the Fort Clinch area became available. They were there was a guy trying to figure out how to sell lots and stuff, and nobody wanted to have anything to do with any of that stuff. So my grandfather, John Ferreira, and a Kelly, and I think one other person, got together and bought Fort Clinch, about 2 miles of oceanfront property where the Pogey plant was, and I think it was over about 1,200 acres of land for $10,000. Well, they had an idea they were going to divide it up and sell the lots and stuff, but nobody wanted to have anything to do with any of that. It was like out in the boonies, and nobody wanted to live on the ocean then. It was like, gosh. So they finally decided what they'd do. They had a guy that was going to tear the fort down and sell the bricks. So they got out there and they couldn't do that. They tried to get it, and the concrete was too good, and it was just labor-wise, it wasn't worth that. So they didn't know what to do. They had all this money invested. Then the taxes were in the thing. So anyway, this Kelly was in the government. He was a representative, I think, or a senator, I'm not sure. And he got the state of Florida, talked them into buying the fort and all the land around it. We have now. It's all down there now. So we could have had a fort if he hadn't sold it.
That is an amazing story.
It's funny. It's the truth. I have a lot of information about that too that really came out in the Amelia Now magazine years ago, and I have copies of all that stuff. Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. And then Granddaddy Askins, he would buy lots on the beach. On this side of where the pier is, he put in about 15 or 20 houses, and they're all the same thing, like 2-bedroom things just for the beach. And he painted them all different colors and called it the Rainbow Cottages. I don't think any of them are there anymore. They're all gone,
Well, that pier is on South Fletcher,
yes.
About 3 miles, 4 miles from
center
from Atlantic Avenue.
Yes.
Heading down South Fletcher.
Down past the roundabout.
Yeah. All right. You've talked about your grandfather. Tell us about your father, his occupation.
Okay, my father, when they moved to Fernandina from Tennessee, they did. Back then they didn't have moving trucks and all that stuff. So they put all the furniture in a freight train, and they sent it by train. And they also, my grandmother and couple of the other kids came in the train, and my father, my grandfather, and my uncle Robert, who was my father's brother, drove from Fayetteville to here in a car. The brand was a Star, S-T-A-R. It was a brand back then. It was like a Plymouth or something like that then. It was about 1925 they did that. They drove here. It took them 5 days to drive to Fernandina. And Dad said they stayed in the Albemarle Hotel. The Albemarle Hotel was located on Broome Street between 5th and 4th, right across from the Catholic Church. And it was here until the 60s when they tore it down. I don't know if you remember that or not.
I do not remember it.
It was right there on that house. So, and it was there all those years. I think they tore it down about 1960 or so. Mm-hmm. And he said, and so then years later, my dad loved to go out and talk. So Casey, my sister, and I had a video recorder. So I said, Dad, I'd like for you to take us to all the places you lived. And we did that. We went to every house he had lived in, which my grandfather, Askins, loved to move because he would buy a house and then he would sell it. You know how these real estate guys do? He'd buy it and sell it to somebody and then move to another one. So that's what we did. And so we went down there. So Dad is talking about this hotel. And he says, and he said, then my friend Frank Muir tore it down and he gave me this. And I looked and it's a number 14. And it came off the door. I said, where'd you get that from, Dad? I never saw that before. I don't know where he got it from. It was in his pocket, Casey probably remembers that. It was so funny. And so I have a video of that, actually, him doing that. So we went to the other houses. They lived in a whole bunch of them all over the town.
Well, the museum would love a copy of that. We can copy it. So that is great. So your father, World War II, he's married.
Yes.
You have been born.
Well, World War II, I was born in 1939, as I mentioned earlier, 20 days before World War II started. So can you imagine having a baby and it's 20 days old and all of a sudden we're in the middle of the whole war? No, we weren't in it, but England was. And officially it started the 1st of September 1939. My dad had a grocery store on the corner of Ash and 6th Street, Askins store. And he had bought that from his brother. His brother started it about 1940, his brother Miller. And then Miller wanted to leave and go to Birmingham, so my dad bought it from him. It's called Askins Supermarket. And he had that store, and he was doing very well with it. It was a very large store for Fernandina. We didn't have Harris Teeter or anything back then. It was all small stores. Piggly Wiggly was the biggest one, I think. So my dad was he was about 30 years old. He was born in 1914. So by 1944 he was 30. Had 2 children. So that was pretty much the end of the draft. But he got drafted into the Army Air Corps. They gave him 1 month to settle up and leave and go to the Army. So he had to sell the store, had to make arrangements for everything in 1 month. So we were living on 18th Street, between 18th, it would be North 18th Street, on 1 block in from the main street. And we had a house there that he had built in 1938, and he sold the house, and then we moved to the church, to the house right next door to the church.
The Presbyterian Church.
The First Presbyterian Church in Fernandina on 6th Street, and we moved into the house which is right next door to it. It would be to the left of it, which would be south
South side.
side.
It's now called the All Day Cottage.
Right. He bought it from the Rudeshauser. I guess Mr. Rudeshauser died, and he bought it from the estate. And I think he said he paid $1,200 for it. So, but what he wanted to do, the reason we did that is because we lived on 18th Street, which was way out in the boonies then, and they didn't want to live way out there during when my father was gone during the war, because of course nobody had any idea how long that war was going to last. So my dad was gone to the army, and so we were there, and I could get up in the morning, and I could walk across the street in the back of the church, across Fifth Street, and across Lottery Street to the house that my grandfather lived in, and have breakfast with my grandfather and my grandmother as a little kid. Back then, if you were 4 or 5 years old, they just turn you out. They didn't worry too much about you, you know. So I did that, and then one day, my little buddy Jimmy Dura, who lived right down the street, and we were really good friends. We just ran around together. We did all this stuff. We were out in the backyard playing. And I'd gotten up early that morning, my mother said. And I got up and we were out playing, and we were doing something and behind the church. And I heard this, I'm going to try to say it. Pop, 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 pop. And we're going, what is all that going on? Well, what happened was the Navy the Navy was flying over the ocean, apparently, and they were doing target practice on sleeves they pull behind airplanes, and somehow or another they got over Fernandina and strafed the entire town. And they hit the bricks downstairs, they hit the freight company, they hit other places that we maybe probably don't know about. But one of the bullets went through our house roof, through the ceiling of my bedroom, and my mother had been walking through the bedroom carrying my little sister, who was about 2 years old, when this bullet came through the roof, through the plaster, knocked plaster everywhere, through my pillow and my bed, and hit the floor and stopped. It was a .50 caliber machine gun bullet out of this airplane. And there was everybody running around going, boo, boo, you know, and so she ran over and got we lived across the street from the Methodist preacher, and good friends of his, and she came over, and they finally ended up, the Navy had to come over, and they were all running around doing stuff. There was an article that was May the 3rd, 1944, and I have an article from the Florida Times Union that has that event in it. So, and I can be glad to show you all that, or give it to you. So my dad had gone off to training since he was a merchant and owned a grocery store. The Army decided to make an airplane mechanic out of him. Can you imagine that? So he goes off to airplane mechanic school, comes back, and he happens to come in on the bus from Jacksonville, because he took a train here. That day, when all that happened, he comes in, and there's Navy cars running around, and everybody's going, really all excited about this shooting the town up. So anyway, that's what happened. Mother had to go to the post office, which was a federal building then, and do something like this, I guess. And she asked them if she could have the bullet, and they said, no, that bullet's evidence. And they said, but you can have a real bullet if you want it. She said, no, I don't want that. I want the one that went through the house. Is a part of this story, jump ahead quite a bit. When I went to work for TWA, Trans World Airlines, I was living in California, and my wife and I used to run around to all the different places and watch them make movies and stuff in Los Angeles. So my mother and father came out to visit us, and it was my dad's 55th birthday. This was 1969, February. So mother said, I love Art Linkletter. You think we could go see the Art Linkletter show? And I said, well, we'll try. So we drove over there, and I kind of knew where it was. And there was a big, long line of people. And the four of us got out and got in this line. And sure enough, that was for the Art Linkletter show. And they came out, and they had these paper, and they said, do you have any really unique incidences that you could write about that you might want to talk about? So my mother wrote all that down, what I just told you about the bullet going through the house. So we got in line and we got up to the door, and the guy says, "Well," he says, "there's only room for 2 people. 4 of you can't go in. That's it." And we said, "Well, you sure? Can't for us 4?" "No." So we said, "Well, Mother and Dad, y'all go in." So Lynn and I, our wife, we stayed outside and just did something. But they went in, and sure enough, Art and Lincoln, they called her down. They said, "We want to hear this story on TV." So my mother goes down, and they put him down the front, my dad. And then during the program, Art Linkletter, most people, you probably don't know anything about Art Linkletter, but you probably do. He was very famous at the time. He was really famous. He asked him about this thing, and she told the story and all that stuff. So back then, you couldn't record. Nobody had recorders, so nobody saw it. I didn't see it. I've never seen it. But my cousin, Linda Allen Love, you know her. She is in Charlotte, sitting having her hair done, and she goes, "My God, that's Catherine on TV." And as far as I know, she's the only one that saw that program. Isn't that funny? She goes, "That's Catherine on TV, on Art Linkletter, my God." So that's the part of it.
That is hysterical.
Isn't that funny? So anyway, go back to my dad. And then he goes off to the Army. And then we're at home all alone. And then in 1945, he had been to California. He was stationed in California, Sacramento, California. And he came back on furlough. And during that furlough, him and Ben Acosta and my Uncle Slim built a house down on First Street, a little 2-bedroom house to make money, so they could have some money. And they just threw this thing together. I don't know how they did it. I have no idea. And I actually remember going with them as a little kid down to this house when they were building it. So Dad and Mother decided, this is 1945, and the war could go on for another 2 or 3 years. They didn't know, even then, they didn't know how long that war was going to last. So they made the decision to move to California, the family. So Mother and Daddy and my sister Deanna and I got on a train in Jacksonville. I remember Deanna and I did you ever go to the train station in Jacksonville?
Yes.
We were kids. We would run through, I can remember this, we'd run through it and holler, and it would echo, that huge ceiling, it'd be echoing, we were little kids running around. So we got on this train and went from Jacksonville and it went up through Chicago, and we stayed in Chicago for a day or two and went to the big, I think it was Marshall's store, all that stuff. I remember they had escalators in there. I never seen an escalator. Didn't know what that was. It was going up and down all by itself. Stayed there, and then the train was packed full of Army people, sailors and all this stuff. And my dad, he was a real character. He liked to do magic. He had magic tricks and stuff, and he was a real promoter, talking to all these people, carrying on, getting this and that done. And we stayed in we had a Pullman thing where you could have a beds and stuff and sleep on that. So we went all the way out, and somewhere, I think it was in the Dakotas, and this was in March of 45. So in the Dakotas, somewhere, the train stopped, and I can remember looking out, and it was a big curve where the track went, and the train's up here, and we're in the long thing, and it was a steam engine. Big, huge steam engine, and they were putting water in it. They used to put water in them, all that. And I was so disappointed it wasn't one of those modern-looking trains I'd seen in the magazines. This is an old steam engine, So, but it had snow on the ground. We went, and the train stopped. We all got off and got in the snow and played in the snow. Got back in the train, and then we went across all the mountains, the Rocky Mountains and all that stuff. And I remember looking out and seeing that. And then they had 2 train tracks, and trains would come by each other, one's going 50 miles an hour, the other's going 60, and they're going like 100-mile-an-hour differences. And you can go, woo, going like that. And we just had a ball on that train. So we went all the way to California, And we got out to Sacramento, and he was in an Army base. He was in a air base out there. It's Fairfield Suisun Air Base, and there was another place called Mathers Field, and he was in those things. And his best buddy, Leo Byram, and his wife, Kay, and their little daughter, the wife Margie and the little daughter Kay, she was 2 years old, was out there with them, just like we were. And we all stayed in the same house. And my dad and Leo had bought a 1937 Ford. It was a used car at the time. And they bought that, and they would use that to run back and forth to the base. And we would, while they were working, my mother and I and Margie would get in the car and we'd drive to San Francisco and go over the bridge and all that stuff and look at everything. So that was real nice. So then we were there just a few weeks, and out of the clear blue sky, Dad got emergency orders to leave. You know how they did in the war. They didn't give you anything. So here we are. The next day he left, him and Leo both. And they never told him where they were going. You know how the war, secret, everything was secret. And they're just like gone, and we're out here in California. So they talked to the people that owned the house we became friends with, and they decided that they couldn't get reservations on the train to go back. So they decided to ride in the car, the 37 Ford, back to, well, she lived in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Margie did. So let's see, that would be the three of us, and then five of us got in this car with all our stuff. My mother actually packed up everything and sent it by Railway Express home, all of our trunks and all that stuff. And all we had was a little suitcase. So we drove down to the first night. We went to Bakersfield, California, and I have a picture of the motel we stayed in there. And she wrote a letter to her mother, Margie did. She wrote a postcard to her mother, which I have. And she said, we're on our way home. We'll be there in about a week. You know, you don't call people or anything, nothing, none of that stuff. So we did. We drove down there and we'd stop at places. We stopped in Albuquerque, and we stopped in the Petrified Forest and saw that. And we stopped at some Indian village, and mother bought me a bow and arrow. And we just kept right on going along, and finally ended up in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And then they got it on the train, and we went to Fernandina. So in that month of March of 1945, I was about 5 years old. It went from one end of the country to the other. On both, I bet I went through almost every state except New England states.
That is amazing.
And it was, and I'll swear to you, I don't know. We got home and that was it. And then later, Dad, my father was stationed. He went to Hawaii, is where he was going to. We didn't know that at the time. He was sent to Hawaii, and they were working out there at Hickam Field on the C-54 transport aircraft. It's a big airplane that's used to carry troops around. They used it for everything. It's a big 4-engine airplane, very modern at the time, and he was a mechanic on that. They had teams of people. He worked on I think it was the number 4 engine. They trained him to do just one thing, you know, these mechanics. He wasn't a real mechanic, really. They show him how to do one thing, I think, change spark plugs and stuff. Mm-hmm. He used to bring me stuff home when we were in California, parts of an airplane just to have, for me to have. So he's in Okinawa, my dad, and he worked on the airplanes, and then they dropped the atomic bombs in August of 1945. On August the 6th, they bombed Hiroshima. August the 9th, they bombed Nagasaki. And the next day was my birthday. And I have a picture of my birthday party out in the yard, right in the yard there. And so
you were in what area of the world then?
I was back in Fernandina by the house next door to the church.
Okay, you were close.
They didn't sell the house. The house was just left there. No, I was back in Fernandina, but the bomb happened then, and so the war was essentially over then, and it was officially over pretty much in August the 15th. So I lived my entire life as a young child of 6 years old during World War II, basically. So then my dad was in Okinawa. And then they decided Okinawa was the point where they took all of the airplanes. They had hundreds and hundreds of these C-54s. They flew in from everywhere into Okinawa. and they would bring in the troops off the field because they had huge. Okinawa was a monstrous battle, and all the Marines just coming out of the hills and all this stuff. And so Dad said they would march them down onto the tarmac, and these guys were all in their battle torn up uniforms and all this stuff, dirty, filthy. And he said they would had these big trucks they would pull up, and these Army guys would strip down practically naked, and they would give them brand new everything, brand new uniforms, guns, helmet, all that stuff, pile them into a C-54 and off to Japan. Every 2 minutes, around the clock, they had airplanes, C-54s, flying from Okinawa to Japan with the occupation troops to occupy Japan. So then somewhere around 1946, they sent him back to the States, and he was let out of the Army. He has a discharge, honorable discharge from the United States Army.
And that's what year?
1946 is when he got out. See, 45, the war was over.
Okay.
And 46, somewhere around February 46, he came back. And then he went back and opened the grocery store back up. And the grocery store, he did real well with it. It was still there. My grandfather, J.M. Askins, actually owned the building. So the building was available, so my dad opened it back up, and we have all of the old newspapers where he ran ads on the paper. He was a real promoter about opening the Askins store and all this stuff in 1946. And then, about 1952, things went bad. He gave too much credit. People would buy groceries on credit and not pay him, and he was, and apparently he gave sold groceries to the pogie boats, and something happened there. Somebody went bankrupt. I'm not sure what happened, but anyway, he came home one day and he said, "We're going to go out of the grocery store business and we're going to go into the sign business." Hey, that's pretty cool.
That sounded just like him.
So Dad and I go back to the store with his people, and we take clear the shelf off, fill the back of the truck up with canned goods, and took them to the house that we were living on and put them in the pantry for food. And then we tore down the shelves and stuff that he had built. He called them gondolas, these big shelves, put things on. So we tore those down and cut them up, and he was out selling signs, and we'd paint them out, and I kind of helped as best I could. He'd paint signs and sell them. That's how the sign shop got started. So he knew how to paint signs from all the way back in the 1930s when he was really in high school. Somebody taught him to paint signs, and he had a sign shop, and then he was called it Askins Advertising Company. And at the time, he painted all the signs, and this town was full of his signs. And then at some point, he started selling neon signs. You know what neon is, right? It used to be very popular back then in the early 50s. And we'd go over to Jacksonville to get the neon signs made. So then he decided to build a neon sign plant. You could do that in his little sign shop. And he had a guy that would come in and fabricate the neon signs. Well, I got to watching all that. I was in high school. I was like about 13 or 14 or maybe 15. And I got this guy to show me and help me. And so got where I could make a rudimentary neon sign. I could fix neon. I could put them together and put the gases in them and all that stuff. So Dad says, "Well, that's pretty good. Why don't you do that?" So I could make strip signs, maybe an 8-foot thing of neon, and he'd sell it to restaurants, and they'd put it all around it. And I got where I could do that fairly good. I couldn't do a sophisticated sign, not with a lot of round numbers and letters. So when I went to college, there was a sign shop down the street. So I went down and talked to this guy, Mr. Smith, and he says, "You can paint signs." I told my dad to sign. He said, "Can you paint signs? I need a sign painter." I said, "Well, I used to help him paint. I don't like painting signs." I said, "But I did mention I did the neon." He said, "Well, we have a neon plant here." He says, "We don't have anybody that can do it." He says, "You think you could do that?" And I said, "Well, I can repair them." So he said, "I'll tell you what, you can come in here and practice and play." I said, "Now, I'm not a journeyman. I'm a learner with neon. I'm not great at it, but I can make them work." And so he would get, when a neon piece would break, you weld it back together, basically putting the gas back in it. So he says, I'll give you $3 for every one that you can do. And I said, okay. And so I'd go down there in the afternoon and make $3, which was a lot of money then. It's like 30 now. Isn't that funny?
That is funny.
That was in Marianna, Florida, where I went to junior college.
Yeah.
My dad, when I graduated from high school, Dad says, well, what are you going to do now that you're out of high school? I said, I'm going to get a job at the mill and buy a new car. He said, I'll tell you what. He says, I spoke to Mrs. Sether, the librarian out at the high school, and she said there's a real nice little community college over, they call them junior colleges, over in Marianna, Florida, called Chipola Junior College. He says, why don't you try to go over there for a semester and try it? He said, it might be fun. I said, well, if it might be fun, I'll go. So this is like in June. Now everybody plans a year and ahead. I plan a month ahead. So I go over to Chipola Junior College, graduated from there. I went back to college every year for a semester. I just planned for the next semester. I didn't plan for any more than that. So after I actually graduated from community college with an associate in arts degree, AA degree. So then we decided to go to Florida State University because that had been a girls' college before, and there was a lot of girls there. So my buddy says, let's go over to Florida State. And so we did. And actually, the community college in Florida were very good because you could transfer all that stuff just like you went to Florida State in the beginning. Mm-hmm. You know, everything just went right over there. So I graduated from Florida State in 4 years. Come to find out, I was one of the few people, not the few people, but not everybody in my class graduated in 4 years, but I did. I don't know how. So then I came home after I graduated from college, and I didn't know what I was going to do because I went to the School of Business and graduated in advertising because my dad had an advertiser. I didn't know what to do. So anyway, I'm down helping him work at the sign shop, which was located right down the street here on the 3rd and Ash Street. So I'm walking home for lunch, and I'm walking down the street, and Mr. Mills saw me. You know who that is? Mr. Mills is the guy in charge of the draft board. And he says, Tommy, come here, I want to talk to you. I said, yes, sir, Mr. Mills. So I go over there, and he says, I got a letter from Florida State University where you graduated, now you've lost your deferment. He says, we're going to draft you into the Army in 2 weeks. And he says, you don't want to be in the Army. And I said, no, sir, Mr. Mills, I don't want to be in the Army. He says, what you want to do is you want to be a Navy pilot. I said, really? How do you do that? He says, you go over to Florida State, you go over to the Navy base at Jacksonville, Florida, and talk to Lieutenant Commander Green. He'll sign you up and you'll be a Navy pilot. I said, really? He said, yeah, go do it, basically. And so I did. Monday morning, I get my little car and drive over to Jacksonville Naval Air Station, find this Lieutenant Commander Green, and they had me do all kinds of stuff, take on. Next thing I know, I'm down at Pensacola going through Navy flight training. So then Andy Allen says,
your cousin.
My cousin, Andy Allen, my cousin, says, Tommy, what have you been doing? I said, I'm going to join the Navy and be a pilot. He says, really? How you do that? And I said, you go over there and talk to Lieutenant Commander Green. So he did it too. So next thing I know, Andy and I both are going through Navy flight training in Pensacola, Florida.
Now, was there a war going on at the time?
Well, it was a Cold War. This was 1961.
Okay.
And they were drafting people in the Cuban Missile Crisis happened in 62. And I was in Navy flight training then. And then the airplane I ended up flying in the Navy was a patrol plane. It was carried 11 people. It was a long-distance patrol plane. We go out and hunt submarines in the middle of the ocean, chasing Russian submarines, basically what we did. Andy did the same thing, ended up there. So that's about it. Then after the Navy, I went with TWA and worked for them for 32 years.
So, excuse me if you mentioned this, short-term memory is a problem, but we had talked about the ghost signs. Tell me about the one your father did.
Okay, there's a sign and this is pretty strange in a way. That building is the same building that my grandfather Hardy started in 1900 with his brother J.R.
Okay.
Right down by the train station.
Right.
On
One
the side of that
building
building is a sign, and it had been covered up by another building for all those years, from the 1930s until about probably 15 years ago, I think, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it opened up, that sign's up there, and it has all this big old sign about McJunkin Building Company, not the other, not his transportation company, but his building company, which I had no idea. And the phone number was like 45, number 45 phone number. And my dad painted it. I know he painted because I know his paint. And then later, when something popped off of it, it says Askins Advertisings on it. So I know that he did that. So later, when I was working, I used to work for Dad in the grocery store and then the sign company. I did all sorts of stuff. And one of the things I did was, who's the eye doctor here? Dr.
McLean?
McLean. Okay. Dr. McLean had an office down on 7th Street, right beside that big, huge tree that's in the middle of the road on Ash Street.
This is
Ash and
Dr.
7th.
McLean Sr.
Senior. Okay. Dr. McLean Sr. wanted a gold leaf sign painted on his door. Well, my dad had a sign painter, a guy named Leroy Ship, who was a master of sign painter. This guy was great. He could make the most beautiful signs, and so he went down and he was going to put a gold leaf sign on his window. It says McLean Farm Hall. So my dad sent him down there. For one thing, Leroy didn't drive, and also he was a sort of a binge alcoholic. He did great for 6 weeks, and all of a sudden he didn't show up for a week. So my dad was sending. I found out, I think later, my dad was send me with him to help him do stuff, which I didn't help him do much. So, but I kind of watch him so he wouldn't run off somewhere. So we get down there, and my dad, Leroy is painting this sign, and Mr. McLean comes out, and they're talking, and I'm sitting there listening. I'm like in high school, and I'm listening to them talk, and so come to find out, they said, Mr. McLean said, I was in the Air Force. I was a navigator on the B-24 aircraft, and Leroy said, I was in the Army. I thought, I didn't know that to myself. So Leroy's there talking, and they said, I was in the Army. He was in the, he was in artillery, and he went to Normandy, and he was in, I said to myself, my gosh. So they kept talking. Well, what happened was, during the Normandy invasion, they got up here and they decided to bomb the Germans up here, and the bombers got off a little bit and bombed the Americans too. And Leroy said they bombed him, and he said, you bombed me. They're talking about it. Apparently Mr. McLean was a navigator that bombed Leroy's ship. I thought it was pretty funny. I had no idea. I was just listening to all that stuff, and I never talked to him about it after that. I wish I had have, but that's the story about that.
That is an amazing story.
Now, if you go down, part of that, if you go down to McLean's office, which is now, they've moved, it's down Center Street or Atlantic Avenue, they have that window hanging up there, the exact same one I'm telling you about. They took it off the thing, it has this thing on it, and if you look down the bottom, it says Askins Advertising.
I've seen it, and what an amazing story.
Yeah, I watched him paint that gold leaf.
Yeah. Tommy, just a few questions.
Okay.
You were born in Jacksonville, even though you lived in Fernandina.
Yes. Now,
there's no hospital.
There was
here?
nothing here. I think most people went to. I'll tell you part of that anyway. We went to St. Vincent's Hospital, and I was born. And apparently, they waited too long, and real late at night, my mother decided it was time to go. So they got my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather Hardy, and I guess my father, and they all went over to Jacksonville, and I think they just barely made it. They said it was a midnight rush to get to Jacksonville to this thing. My mother said that back then that they liked to have the mother stay in the hospital 10 days. And because they said that, all the damage that you can do when you're having babies and all that stuff. And they just wanted them to be there more and take care of them, and then take care of the baby, and that's what they did. And I have the bill from St. Vincent's Hospital, and it was for 10 days. It was $66.
Times have changed. When you referred to First Street, that your father came home from the war and in a month he and a friend built a house on First Street, are you talking about what we now call Front Street?
No, Fur, F-I-R. And I think it was right at First and Fur and Third. I found that house one time about 20 years ago, and it's gone now.
Okay,
they tore it down.
F-I-R?
F-I-R.
Oh, okay. So
all those streets are trees.
Okay. So it's First Street, not First Street.
Yes, Fur,
okay.
F-I-R. It's right about Fur and Third, right about there. But the house is gone. It was torn down maybe 20 years ago. I found it one time. It was still there. It's just a simple 2-bedroom house. You can throw those things together, quick.
We haven't explored Emma Love Hardy.
Okay.
If you would tell us what you know about
yes.
Emma Love.
Emma Love Hardy was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. And apparently her parents and all that were very uppity. They were a very nice upper class family. They had a nice home, all that stuff. She came here to visit her very good friend, Mrs. Baker.
Wife of Hinton.
Judge Hinton Baker's wife.
Senior. Hinton James Baker Senior.
Yes, yes.
His wife.
I can't remember her first name. But my grandmother came to visit her. They went to school together or something of each other. And then when Hinton Baker was my grandfather Noble's, I think his best friend, one of the best friends in town. They got along together great. So they went to pick her up, the Bakers, and my grandfather went with them. And he looked at my grandmother, and she got off the train and told him, he said, I'm going to marry that gal someday. He fell in love with her right away. And sure enough, they got married later, and they had the wedding in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. That's where she was from, so the family had it there. And
was that the double wedding?
It was a double wedding. Her sister married a Mr. Black, and so there was a double wedding. We talked about that, and it was. And I send you a copy of the invitation.
Yes. And also, she was very involved in the Women's Club.
Yes, she was one of the founders, I think, of it. And she was the president of it one time. She did all sorts of women's club stuff.
Including a drive for tonsils.
Yes. They used to take, for example, when I was about 5 years old, they took me to the hospital and took my tonsils out. Just did it. They figured, we'll just get those tonsils out so nobody have to worry about it. Which is probably the wrong thing to do.
Well, yes, times have changed.
So nobody my age has tonsils. So I don't know what else. I'd like to, this World War II thing, I kind of go back to that. I think that World War II was one of the biggest, the most horrendous human event ever, I think. All that stuff went on, and it affected everybody, and we changed everything. And people born in the late 30s, like me, are going to be the last group of people that have an actual memory of World War II. And that's going, that's at some point, we're going to have to be the last ones, because the people born before us will be gone, and the people born like in 43, just right after me, won't have that memory. But I have those memories of World War II.
That is so true.
I remember one day, Mother and I, and maybe somebody else, went to Jacksonville. She liked to go to Coins store.
Coins.
Yeah. She liked to go there. So we go over there, and somewhere at Yulee, the military police made us get off the road. So I'm watching around, I'm a little kid, and we got off the road, and all of a sudden these big convoy came by, just truck after truck. A little kid watching that thing go by in those big trucks. I can remember, that's embedded in my memory somewhere.
Well, you've lived a long, incredible life, and I tell you, on behalf of the museum, I know they are incredibly grateful to have you here.
Well,
If you'd like to, if you remember anything else,
well,
go right ahead.
let me think. Okay, I went to work with, this is not in Fernandina. This is my job. When I went to work with TWA, I went out to, back then, if you were a Navy pilot, almost any airline would hire you right away. So I decided on TWA because they were transcontinental, go across the ocean, and also local. I had a application to Delta, and I thought, you know, that I don't think that little airline's going to make it. They're going to have real problems. I was wrong on that for sure. And then there was a couple of others. United Airline, I didn't want to work with them because all my buddies said, you don't want to go talk to them because they make you take this big test, a stay-9 test. They said, it's just a big pain. I said, no, I don't want to do that either. So TWA was great. I just flew out to Kansas City, filled out a few things, and they hired me, and that was it. So I came home from the Navy, and I'm sitting in the thing, and the phone rings, and this guy says, this is so-and-so from TWA. We'd like to have you come out in about 2 weeks, start your class. I said, well, you know, I don't know. I said, I want to take some time off. I was in the Navy, and I have some things I want to do. The guy said, let me tell you what. He says, you need to really get out here and get on the seniority list. He said, it'll be, you won't believe it, but later you will. And he's right. The airline's seniority is everything. They give you a number when you went to work, and everything you do after that is because of your seniority. If you want to, you get what, if you're more senior than this other guy, you get what you want, not he doesn't get it. Days off, work, airplanes, all that stuff, where you live, everything. So I went to Kansas City, trained on the Convair 880 as a flight engineer, went out to California, Lynn and I, and stayed out there flying out on the engineer, which was the third pilot, sort of. And then I moved up to the 707 co-pilot and flew that for a few years. And then TWA started having financial troubles. So I had to go back and be an engineer again on the thing. So then they sent me over to the 727. So I flew that as a flight engineer, and then I flew that as a co-pilot. And then later I ended up flying the 727 as a captain for 10 years. But I flew all those other airplanes as engineer or co-pilot or something. At one time, I was a co-pilot on the 727 and a flight engineer for 6 months during the summer. I could hold a co-pilot job, which paid more. And then in the wintertime, the airline would crank down and lay people off and stuff. So I had to go back and be a flight engineer on the 707. So I'm here I am trying to figure out all these two different airplanes, flying those things around. And the 707, you flew across the ocean, so we did get a chance to do a lot of transatlantic stuff.
Did you ever land at the Fernandina airport when you were in training?
No. It was not a real airport then. I don't know what it was. It was, we used to go out there and race cars at night. I know that. You know, there's just a runway and everybody down there flying down the runway.
A lot of people did that.
A lot of people did that.
Learned to drive on the runway.
Yeah. No.
Yes.
Well, this has been a pleasure
Well, I hope I helped.
having you here. I think
Yes.
great
I can't think of anything else that's, I mean, I could go on and on about a bunch of crazy stuff.
Well, we'll call this closed. We may be running out of tape or whatever.
Well, anyway, it was a lot of fun.
Yes. So thank you so much. I
Yeah.
appreciate you spending your vacation time telling these great stories.
Well, I'm glad I had an audience. Yeah.